Hi there, my name is Dominique Dusek, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Accessibility Services here at University of St. Francis. And in today's video, we're going to talk about creating accessible course content for your Canvas shell. So we, of course, have to talk about what makes digital accessibility important. First and foremost, I like to think that we want all of our students to be able to access the information that we present to them, that it's about being a welcoming community of learners and one that's inclusive. And it's hard to include students without making information available to them. Beyond that, it's also enforced by federal law. So the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act outline some standards for what makes content accessible for individuals. I'm going to stop you there. Perhaps you're staring at my screen. Perhaps you're frustrated and you wanted to switch out of this presentation immediately. Perhaps you feel a little disengaged. This slide that you see before you is actually an awful example of digital accessibility, and I wanted to feature it here because I wanted to take a look at some of the things that make it frustrating for a lot of learners. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to maybe name some of those things. Take a look at our slide. What do you see that feels frustrating or that is inaccessible? So hopefully you're starting to key in on a couple of things. One might be font size. Another might be font contrast. So this slide features a lot of information, a narrative block of information, and yet the font is very small, it's very low contrast, it's hard for me to see without my glasses. I see in the title, Welcome to Accessibility. The title is a little bit more general, and it has very curly decorative font that for an individual with dyslexia or an individual who is low vision or blind, very, very hard to read. I see a lot of clutter happening on this slide. I see images that may or may not have alternative text or text that a screen reader can read in lieu of the images. And if you have impeccable eyesight, you might be able to see that there is a link here toward the end of this paragraph that says, click here to learn more, and then the HTTP followed by a series of letters and slashes and kind of incomprehensible information. I don't know about you, but I don't often gamble with what is called a raw link or a link that doesn't really tell me where it's going to redirect me once I click on it. So there are several things happening here that are examples of very poor accessibility in terms of materials. And actually, all of these things together, and even some of them individually, may create barriers to learning. So how do we fix it? As we looked at the previous slide, we considered a number of factors that made it difficult to access the information or hard to understand the information that the slide was presenting. But that's only half the battle. Of course, we want to be able to identify what kinds of things might be barriers to accessibility, but we also want to talk about how we can go ahead and reverse them, how we can improve accessibility for our students. So if I wanted to revise the previous slide to make it clearer, to make it easier to read and understand, I would start by adding a specific heading. I would break that large paragraph of text into key points, bullet points. I would use emphasis, like bolding, just to make information appear more organized and to give my reader some entry points as to what's important and where to start reading, so they don't feel overwhelmed. I would make sure that any image I include is relevant, so it's connected to the central idea, and I would make sure that those images include alt text, which we'll talk more about in this presentation, so that if someone could not visually perceive those images, their assistive technology, like a screen reader, could read aloud a description of the image to them. I would make sure that my fonts were clear, legible, and high contrast. I would want to make sure that any link that I included was a descriptive link. Again, this is something we'll unpack a little more a little later, but it's important to know what you're clicking on, when you're clicking on it, especially in today's internet landscape. And I would make sure that any media has an accompanying caption or transcript. My hope is that through this workshop, we'll equip you with some practical skills and show you how to do these things. So I'll go through and I'll demonstrate how you can select a high contrast readable font, how you can insert alt text to your images and avoid clutter that's going to visually overwhelm your reader or viewer. I'll show you how to create some descriptive links and what, of course, not to do when naming your links, and I'll show you where you can find the accessibility checker in many Microsoft programs. Before I move on to demonstrate some practical skills, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge why accessible digital content is so important. And a large piece of that is our students. We want information to be readily available. And those students that maybe are low vision or blind use assistive technology like an e-reader, who have a processing disorder or executive dysfunctioning challenges where a large glut of information that is poorly organized can be overwhelming. Students that have dyslexia or other learning disabilities that may affect their ability to perceive written information, and maybe even our students that have limited English proficiency or limited academic English proficiency, all deserve the same access to information as anyone else. And these students are really going to benefit from some of the strategies that we talk about today. So I'm so sorry, but we have to revisit our inaccessible, awful slide design momentarily. This one's a little bit different than the one that you saw initially, but it definitely manifests a lot of the same problems, right? Clutter, not being very readable, having fonts that are not very high contrast, right? And so I want you to take a moment, take in this slide, right? And then I'm going to show you what a revised version would look like with the concepts we have previously talked about applied. Here it is, the new and improved version, right? So I've gone ahead and I've rewritten the dense narrative information or the dense paragraphed information, and I've broken it up with some bullet points. I've used some emphasis, so some bolding. I've separated information into headings so that it is in more manageable chunks. I've also changed my font to something that is just clean lines, very readable, and I've enlarged it so that it is easier for anyone who maybe has limited vision or low vision to read what is actually said here. And then I did go ahead and I included a graphic, but that graphic relates directly to what is being discussed here. So the WCAG principles, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And then I've also rephrased this hyperlink down here so that my reader knows exactly what they are going to see when they click on this hyperlink. So it is going to bring them to an article called WCAG 101. So one of the first things I did when redesigning the slide to improve it and to make it more accessible was look at the actual written content. This is probably the most important aspect of many of the materials that you have in class, that you have on your Canvas. Maybe not the most important all the time, right? There might be some really important pieces of media that you incorporate into your class, but written content does a lot to convey information to students. And so I trust that many of you already know how to organize things into headings and bullet points to make it more accessible for your students. I would certainly encourage that you do that. If you notice yourself blocking things into large paragraph chunks, think about where you can break it up, and also think about how readable the font is. So when I'm selecting a font, I try to pick something that is a size 12 or larger for body text. We want it to be nice and big and readable. We want it to also be a clear sans serif font. If you think of fonts like Arial, Calibri, these are sans serif fonts. They don't have these small feet that a font like Times New Roman may have, and they've actually become default fonts. In our institution now for Microsoft, we see Aptos a lot. It's also a very clean sans serif font that's readable. The reason that these fonts are chosen to be default fonts is because they are legible for many individuals. So they have a lot of utility. What I would certainly avoid is those curly, cursive looking, very decorative fonts. Those are universally very difficult to read for most people. I would also focus on selecting high contrast colors. You really can't go wrong with your classic black text on a white background, but other high contrast options are also acceptable. You just don't want font to appear pale, hard to read, hard to discern. You can also use emphasis to call out certain terms, call attention to certain areas of text. My one caveat with that is you don't want to overuse it, because if we are creating a hodgepodge of bolding, italics, underlining, that in the same way can become very overwhelming and very difficult for students to read. A gratuitous cute animal photo, my favorite. One of the things that I highly recommend to make your content accessible is to only include images if they are relevant. You don't want to overclutter your slides or inundate students with visual information if it's not actually enhancing the information that you're presenting. In this case, I'd like to take a moment to imagine that this is an image that we're selecting for an animal rescue website, and that these kittens are up for adoption. And I want to take a moment to entertain this scenario because I'd like to show you what the process might be for writing effective alt or alternative text. So alternative text is text that can be read by an e-reader if a student or a person is not able to visually discern or make out the image. And what makes alt text effective is it should give a brief description of what you're seeing, and it should help the reader or the viewer to understand the relevance of it. So if, for example, I was going to include this image on, like I said, a website, a rescue website, stating that these two kittens were available for adoption, I would take a moment, I would describe them, right? I would state, let's give these little guys names. So let's just say that they are Clover and Charm. So two tawny kittens, Clover and Charm, frolic in the grass as they wait for their prospective forever home. Right? So we want to give some visual description of what's being seen. We want to help it make sense. Why is this image being shared? What's the meaning of it? Notice as I was crafting that text, I kept it short. I kept it to the point. If your alt text exceeds maybe a sentence or two, you're probably including too much. But you also want to avoid the obvious. So you don't necessarily want to use words like an image of two kittens, right? So avoid saying like an image, a graphic, whenever possible, because if there is alt text for it, it is more than likely an image or a graphic. One of the cardinal accessibility sins is using a raw link, or just copying and pasting like the poor example shows, the HTTP and various letters, symbols, gibberish that follows, right? We instead want to have descriptive hyperlinks. And so in order for a link to be descriptive, we need people to know what they're going to experience if they click on it. So I will admit to all of you that I was a perpetrator of click here language for a long time. That also is a little bit vague, right? And especially if I have a visual impairment, it doesn't help me to know exactly where I'm clicking. So instead of using the full URL language, instead of using language like click here, we want to provide a hyperlink that tells the listener viewer, right, what's going to happen when they click. So instead, I've written an effective example that says refer to the digital accessibility checklist. And I would make those words digital accessibility checklist a hyperlink so that it could just be clicked and then my viewer is able to go to the new window or screen. As a classroom teacher, I really loved my Google Suite for a lot of reasons. I really love my Google Drive, and I still do However, one thing that I really appreciate about a lot of Microsoft tools is the fact that most of them do have a built-in accessibility checker tool that also has an option when you are using it to learn more about accessibility. So it'll really walk you through the steps of making your documents accessible and help you identify what kinds of patterns or challenges kind of arise in your documents. So you'll get a little greater understanding of some of the concepts we've talked about today. You can typically find this tool, it'll be located a little different in each program, but under the review option in the menu bar at the top of the screen, once you click the review tab, you'll want to click check accessibility, and that will open up a dialog box on the right hand side of the screen that'll give you more descriptive information, and it will prompt you to look at things like color contrast and then walk you through which of your slides in your presentation or which of the aspects of your document, right, are poorly contrasting colors. It will ask you to look at the reading order of things, so on and so forth. It'll point out those images that maybe are missing alt text. These types of tools do use AI to then help you to auto-generate things like alt text. Hopefully you'll use the information we learned and talked about today to craft that alt text effectively. As we use AI, we do want to remember it is a robot, right? It doesn't have the nuanced human understanding of certain complex issues, and so you always want to double check it. He is not perfect, this AI, but with the knowledge, hopefully, that you're gaining through opportunities like this, you can utilize that AI to make smarter choices, to make more effective choices, and then tailor them. So one other really phenomenal free resource is the self-paced training on Canvas. So it's actually through Canvas. It's in the Canvas Services Training portal. You'll want, when you are in Canvas in your course page, to go to the left-hand side, click on the question mark icon, and then scroll down until you see the Training Services portal. Once you click on the Training Services portal, it may take you to a new page that asks you to authorize your account. You can go ahead and do that. It is safe. And then once you do that, you'll see some free trainings. There are a couple in there I have completed and highly recommend. This one on the fundamentals of accessible digital content. It is just a handful of modules, but talks much more specifically about things like descriptive links, like alternative text, captioning, media. We will go ahead and in a future micro session talk more about captions and transcripts if that is a topic of interest, and I hope it is for you, because media can be very valuable to enhancing the learning experience of our students. In this workshop, we talked a little bit about selecting high contrast readable fonts, adding alt text for your images, and avoiding clutter, so only selecting those images that are really relevant to the content and actually enhance the content, using descriptive hyperlinks rather than click here language or URL text, and then double checking your work using the accessibility checker that's built into a lot of these programs. To add to this, I really just want to say that small changes make a significant impact. Maybe pick one of your courses to focus on and go through and take a look at all of the media. Maybe go through, look at the key assignments, and change all your major assignments or major tests into a more readable font. Progress is always valuable, and it's important to remember that progress is the goal, not necessarily perfection. So we're going to keep working toward accessibility. That is something that we do as an ongoing challenge. And if you can focus on just a couple of ways to do that, I think that's incredibly valuable. And I'm always here to help. If you have questions, if you feel lost, if you're not sure where to get started, if you need a guide or a checklist, please, 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 please reach out. I'm more than happy to help. With that said, I have a shameless self-promotion here. I've linked a couple of the tools and resources that our office has created that we hope will be beneficial to you. So you have the digital accessibility checklist. Look at that descriptive hyperlink, right? It tells you exactly what you'll get when you click on it. And then our accessible course content strategy strategy guide, both of which I hope you will check out, and please reach out with any questions in regards to either of those. I appreciate you and all that you do for your students so much. I know they do too. You can absolutely reach out to me with any questions at 815-740-3204 or via email. I can be reached at ddusek@stfrancis.edu or oas@stfrancis.edu. Or you can come on over and visit me in my office in Tower Hall. Thanks again for checking out this workshop on making digital content for Canvas more accessible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.